Hi, everyone. Today's meeting, we're going to be talking about virtue ethics. So first of all, what is virtue ethics, right? Virtue ethics was first sort of started, I guess, by Aristotle in his work, the Nicomachean Ethics. And it basically focuses on how right character comes before right behavior. So when we think of like utilitarians and Kantians, the sort of main issue is what is it right to do? But for virtue ethics, being a morally good person is a key ingredient of living well and being happy. So virtue ethics is mainly concerned with the process of becoming a moral person in its entirety. So a main question that virtue ethics deals with is how should I live? Now, something that's a key idea in this, idea of virtue ethics is purpose. Aristotle believed that the purpose of human life was to attain happiness, and that every human action is directed towards, another purpose for that larger purpose. So, for instance, I get up in the morning because I want to go to work, or I go to work because I want to earn a living and have a career, and I want earnings in a career so that I can have a good life. So, every action is driven and motivated by a certain aim that adds to this entire purpose that we have. So, first of all, what is a virtue, right? A virtue is a character trait or quality that is good and contributes to happiness. Something that's the opposite of virtue is called vice. And these are personality traits that actually undermine happiness. So, they undermine this journey of reaching that purpose and therefore must be avoided. So, how is virtue ethics different and I guess advantageous, right? The first sort of point is relativity. Virtue ethics, or according to virtue ethics, there's no absolute good or evil. This is different from other different, moral codes and moral ethics because according to Kant, for instance, we must always and in every circumstance obey his fundamental principle of morality, which was like his categorical imperative. But for virtue ethics, everything is relative. So there's no absolute good or evil. Another key point in virtue ethics is this idea of cherishing character over actions. Unlike utilitarianism, which considers that what matters is that you do the right thing, right? You promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number. And this is a rule that you have to follow for utilitarianism. However, for virtue ethics, it's more about the character over actions. It's about your motives and your incentives in creating certain actions. So it doesn't really matter as much how much good or evil you put into the world, but rather if you made those decisions based on a moral code and what that reveals about your character. For virtue ethics, there's also individual freedoms that it grants you. They don't give you prescriptive rules or strict laws that you must follow as per this ethical code, but you have to look at what it means to be human. So it gives more freedom to the individual to choose how you should act. And basically, the agent is in complete control of their own morality. It's basically up to us to become the kind of people that we want to be. But there's also some weaknesses of virtue ethics, as with any code of ethics. First can also be the strength, but it's also a weakness as well. We talked about the individual freedoms and how it can be valuable and advantageous because the agent is in complete control. But it's also a weakness because that means there are no rules, right? There's not a list of right and wrong acts, and it doesn't give you a method to work out whether something could fit on a right act list or a wrong act list. The people that are basically unable to figure out how to guide their own actions are therefore more lost because of this lack of rule. Another weakness, per se, of virtue ethics is the judgment of motives, right? Virtue ethics focuses again on the motives and incentives and the characters behind actions as opposed to the tangible, measurable effect of different actions. So when we're considering who's virtuous, it's difficult to measure and sort of judge the motives and character of people behind making actions, right? How do we know a person's acting virtuously or trying to act virtuously? And how can we judge who is virtuous? How are we able to tell the motives of a certain person? Another weakness that you could consider for virtue ethics is that it's elitist, right? Aristotle actually believed that a person who does not have a formal education could never reach true morality. And just because they haven't been educated in the virtues, and it seems wrong to say that just because someone's uneducated, and doesn't have access to a formal education, that they could not be moral. So there's a lot of different multifaceted aspects that you have to consider, as with any other code of ethics. So recently, there's been sort of like a modern revival, right? Virtue ethics was technically characteristic of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. But recently, since the later part of the 20th century, through thinkers like Elizabeth and Scombe and Philippa Foot and Alistair McIntyre, virtue ethics has become a little bit more prevalent. And so, as with any other code of ethics, again, it's really important when you're considering these different um, flaws or advantages per se to consider the multifaceted aspect of virtue ethics. So I'll just go back to this question really quickly of how should I live, right? Virtue ethics, in one sentence, is focusing on the motives behind an action. It's focusing on the morality and how you can decide to be a good person. Now, whatever that means is relative, and so that's another weakness. But when you're just thinking of virtue ethics as a whole, you can frame everything around this question of how should I live? And so now, as virtue ethics is coming back with a modern revival, just keep in mind that everything is relative in virtue ethics, and individual freedoms are granted in virtue ethics that can be either an advantage or a weakness.